Thank you, Allie, and thank you, Katie. I love what I do, and I do what I love. I get to support and accompany others to heal trauma and promote meaningful, positive, lasting change in themselves and the worlds they live in. I also do what I love because I get to approach my work with positivity, playful creativity, joy, compassion, and hope. I also get to connect with my academically nerdy side, which fuels everything I do with evidence-based theory and research. Do you think it's any coincidence that I chose this career and how I express myself in it, given that both of my parents were survivors of the Holocaust? I promise you, it isn't. So you can imagine, given this, I get especially excited to present at forums like this one at Columbia University's Narrative Medicine program because many of you are like me. We're birds of a feather. We share similar ethos and values because we get to be curious about and actively involved in witnessing and sharing our own as well as others' narratives. And as we make meaning of these stories, we play a role in repairing suffering and trauma, in protecting and empowering the vulnerable and vulnerability. And we get to build resiliency and hopefully a safer and healthier future. I would like to send one shout out to a particular bird of a feather, Malika Jawed, who graduated from this program last year. Last spring, I think it was, my older son and I were with Malika at lunch, and he said, "Hey, Malika, did you know my mom is finishing writing her book?" Now, Malika knew that I was a trauma therapist, but not an author. And she got excited as we entered into a conversation about my book and what I do and how I approach trauma. She was really energized because she said this was so aligned with narrative medicine and what she was learning about the healing powers of narrative creation through connection, vulnerable sharing, being able to clarify the symptom or the problem, make meaning of it to promote a new narrative that was healing and transformative. I was thrilled to learn of this needed field. Malika then had immediately gone to the director of narrative medicine, Stacy Quartaro, and I was invited to present at rounds about my book. So here I am, and thank you, Malika. I also want to thank this whole team, Kristen and Allie, and if I'm forgetting on anyone like Janessa, I'm sorry, but thank you for having me here. So let me start uh, and give you a little bit of my story about how my book came to be, which was truly a journey of how my necessity as a trauma therapist became the mother of my narrative invention. Late in the 1980s, after I graduated from my clinical psychology program, my first job was in a community mental health center at the University of Medicine and Dentistry. All of my clients were identified victims or suspected victims of child sexual abuse, ranging in ages from 1.5 to 18. They all suffered multiple forms of co-occurring abuse, including physical, witnessing or being a part of interpersonal violence or domestic violence, chronic relational trauma, intergenerational trauma, ethnic, racial, moral, religious abuses and trauma, and many more. They also experienced socioeconomic stress. Some were low income, and some lost their financial means and lifestyles due to the ripple effects of disclosure. Each of these clients were involved also in multiple systems like the courts, child protective services, foster care. They were in schools, and they were often psychiatrically hospitalized, sometimes multiple times. So here it is. I had these kiddos as my clients, and I was looking to the literature to guide me. Now, there was lots of new psychological and neuroscientific understandings emerging of adult trauma and dissociation, thanks to people like Lenore Tur, Judith Herman, Bennett Braun, Frank Putnam, and Richard Kluft. A lot of the literature, though, was still very left brain or very talk therapy focused. There was the beginning of an appreciation of right brain or somatic based approaches based on the work of Bessel van der Kolk, Francine Shapiro, the creator of eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, known to many of you as EMDR, and Christine Courtois, who was working with adults who had been victims of childhood incest. So we were learning to get a better understanding of childhood trauma's prevalence, its long-term effects, and how to treat it in adults. But the literature for treating trauma in children was still quite sparse. I was so appreciative of Beverly James's and Eliana Gill's work, who I believe were instrumental in putting child, adolescent, and family trauma treatment on the map. But the field of child trauma treatment was still in its infancy. Get the pun? So here it is. I'm working with these traumatized kiddos without extensive theory or practice guidelines. And I found myself taking the adult trauma literature and theory and growing it down to developmentally as well as playfully fit my traumatized child clients. And this work was often like flying by the seat of my pants kind of work. I tried as hard as I could to stay grounded in deep clinical presence and attunement, and I learned to go with the creative flow and also trust my clinical gut or intuition. Most importantly, I sought oodles and oodles of supervision. I found my clients were truly improving and even thriving, but I wasn't sure why. After 5 years in this position, I left and moved into private practice, and my reputation as a trauma therapist followed me. And colleagues just referred me traumatized clients of all ages, particularly the ones that were most difficult to treat. And so now, in my work, particularly with adult traumatized clients, I got stuck a lot. And when I didn't know what to do, I moved back into using the playful and sensory motor right brain approaches I had used with my kids. I grew them up to fit my adults. And not only did my adult clients seem to enjoy this reprieve from the heavy left brain talk therapy modality, but they seemed to feel better and lighter and more motivated to continue the work. I did too. Again, I wasn't really clear though what was working or why it was working. Over time, I developed the embodied mirroring technique, which is a relational body-to-body technique that promotes movement in those stuck points of therapy or these relational impasses that characterize so much of the work with complex and chronic trauma. I started presenting workshops on this technique, also on nonverbal, playful approaches to trauma healing and treatment. And I found that my attendees and also in supervision, my supervisees were so receptive and they shared a renewed vitality and motivation that guided their practices. I had started to gain momentum in spreading the value of a playful spirit and nonverbal right brain approaches in trauma healing work with clients of all ages. But that momentum got paused as I started to deal with a lot of family crises, sicknesses, and deaths. And then, of course, the global pandemic came along. So, what I did when I was able to, I attended more online workshops, I read, I pursued different kinds of consultation. And with this, I grew even more certain that playfulness, not play therapy, had an important place in treating trauma across the lifespan. And so I wrote up an article, which I submitted to a peer-reviewed journal about this. It was outright rejected. However, each of the three reviewers saw promise in my thesis, and they basically encouraged further development. My husband and some of my closest friends who are also clinicians in the field said, Monica, it is time to write the book. I knew they were right. I needed to. And so I dove in and I came up for air about 5 years later. So, as I was committed to writing this book, I had a number of intentions which I wanted to guide my writing. First, even though this was an academic book, I wanted it to be approachable, enjoyable, digestible, very experienced near, written from my heart and using my clients' voices. I also wanted it to be scientifically rigorous, to include all of the current or state-of-the-art trauma treatment and theory that was helpful to me. This included everything from polyvagal theory, interpersonal neurobiology, affective neuroscience, sensory motor psychotherapy, accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy, internal family systems, coherence therapy, structural dissociation of the personality, and more. I also wanted to include a very deep developmental understanding of play and its role in growth and healing, and specify the powers of playfulness, which I like to call the superpowers, that help rewire and transform trauma. I wanted this this book, to convey something that was trans-theoretical, that was compatible with all different approaches to treatment. I also wanted it to be universally relevant, applicable to clients of all ages, backgrounds, developmental levels. And I knew it was possible because all humans and all mammals share a play circuit in their brains. I wanted it to be supportive of those on the front lines of trauma treatment who would read my book so it could help them relieve burden, burnout, and beleaguerment. And of course, I wanted it to promote joy and curiosity and encourage a playful creativity in the reader. So I was going to go big or go home, and I went big. So ultimately, my book became an integration of everything I had learned and used to date. It became the resource I wish I had had when I started in the field. What I hope my book serves to do and be is a bridge of theory and practice, something that unifies the literature between child and adult treatment, that is a buddy to all those healing professionals, whether in training or seasoned, to feel that they're not alone and to bring them and their clients optimism and hope in the work. And finally, to inspire all readers to connect with their playful spirit in the facilitation of trauma rewiring and transformation. So, to give you a sense of how to bring this playful spirit to the work, I want to share a brief case example of how to do so with trauma-related symptoms, in this case, cutting. What we need to think about when we approach symptoms is that we need to welcome them as allies. So imagine for a moment a symptom is like this big, onerous, scary, intimidating, ugly monster, right? But when we realize it's just a mask or a shield of coping that protected a vulnerable being to survive at all costs, and it was their best attempt at doing so, we then can approach these symptoms with curiosity and respect and ask, what is this symptom's best intention, or what was it, and what is the story lying within it? We also then get to appreciate that symptoms are both and. They were both once adaptive, right? Helping someone have tailor-made to them and their developmental needs a coping helper at the time of trauma. But now they're destructive. They get in the way. They block a person's current thriving. And finally, in this playfully spirited approach, I like to think of following symptoms playing a follow the leader game, but these are following the symptom leaders as those guides to solutions. When we follow a symptom, we basically learn about its inherent wisdom in its person-specific way, that when that gets revealed, we can then figure out how to update that symptom to serve the client best now. Now, many have said to me that this mindset really contrasts with Western medicine's approach, which is an elimination and an eradication approach to symptoms. So let me share about Maisha, whom I met when she was 14 and a half. She was a self-identified biracial female. Her symptom was cutting different parts of her body 5 times a day or more, which on multiple occasions landed her in the emergency department to get stitches for the deeper cuts. Her history of symptoms started at age 12, when incest by her father started. At age 14, Maisha courageously disclosed. Now, her father, who was a high-powered CEO of a Fortune 100 company, pressured her to recant, but she did not. As a result, her parents divorced. Her father withdrew financial support. Maisha and her family were forced to move out of her childhood home. She lost her lifelong friends. She lost her supportive community and the style she grew accustomed to. In building connection with Maisha and her symptoms, I work non-judgmentally with deep respect and welcoming compassion to help her and her symptoms feel and be safe, seen, soothed, to develop a sense of security. That secure trust then allowed me to approach her in a question that I posed, like, hey, Maisha, I was wondering if you could teach me about your experience of cutting, but not just tell me about it, show me about it, the movements in a step-by-step way But again, not with a razor, but with your finger. Then I could mirror these movements if you'll allow me to. I was literally and figuratively asking her permission to walk in her shoes to get a better, more embodied understanding and experience of her cutting. Now you can imagine Maisha looked at me shocked, and she'd never been asked this before. Yet she was intrigued and she was on board. So she guided me and showed me her process step by step before, during, and after these cutting sequences. I mirrored her nonverbally, and in that, she corrected me. After all, she was the expert of her own experience. Through doing this, I started to have these experiences somatically and emotionally. This is called countertransferences or projective identifications in psychotherapy language. What I was doing now was I was working to put left brain language, narrate these experiences inside of me to see whether and how they fit Maisha's experience. So there were a number of things that we worked together to explore and then integrate left and right brain experience. So, for one, what I found emerged in me was a trance like state or dissociation. I narrated to Maisha how this helped me disconnect from pain. I wondered if that's what she had felt and that it actually felt safe to do so. She acknowledged it did. I also had noticed out loud that when Maisha caused or started her cutting and stopped it, she was able to take back power and control of pain, which had once been in somebody else's hands. She smiled at this. Then I imagined in these cycles of mirroring, what was it like to see the blood flowing? And it seemed like it might be a reminder that she survived. It actually validated Maisha that she was still alive despite her father's threats to kill her if she either didn't comply or told. Maisha seemed very emboldened at this discussion. Finally, I noticed how this cleaning up ritual reinforced her capacity to self-care and repair harm. So through this embodied mirroring experience and cycles of it, Maisha and her tailor-made symptoms had been seen and felt and understood, and their meaning had been languaged and revealed. As a result of this, Maisha acknowledged, you know, Monica, my symptoms really do have good intentions, but their outcomes, they really suck. It was at this point I had one of those aha clinical insights and creative, energizing moments, which I've shared with her. And I asked her, Maisha, what if we helped your symptoms' best intentions get expressed wisely? And you traced smiley faces of care on your wrist and not lines. Maisha looked at me quizzically because, in fact, I was now prescribing an updated version of her symptom. She was receptive, and together we practiced this movement with our fingertips while speaking out loud the heartfelt best intentions shared by the symptom. As a result of this, Maisha's cutting reduced from 1 to 3 times a week from what it had been, and she never again had a visit to the ED. She shifted from using razor blades to magic markers to her fingertips to lightly draw these smiley faces on the different parts of her body where she had had the urge to cut. Together, we had transformed her once destructive behavior into a compassionate and empathic act of self-care. This led to more recursive healing cycles. So to close, I'd like to share an excerpt from my book, from page 304, A Playful Goodbye Lesson from Guido and Josue. To end our exploration of inviting the spirit of play to trauma treatment, I'd like to share a poignant example, this time from the movies. In the 1997 comedy drama Life is Beautiful or La Vita è Bella, Guido Orefici, a Jewish Italian bookshop owner, uses his deeply creative imagination to shield his son Josue from the horrors of imprisonment in a Nazi concentration camp. To help him survive, Guido explains to Josue that the camp is a complicated game where he can win points for successfully performing tasks his father gives him. Guido says he too will play the game, and whoever earns 1,000 points first will win a tank. Josue is told he will lose points if he cries, complains he wants his mother, says he's hungry, and will win extra points if he hides from the camp guards. By bringing the spirit of play into the horrors of the death camp, Guido not only saves his son's life, but also reduces the impact of the trauma. Guido and Josue offer the ultimate example of how we can co-regulate and deeply care for others with a playful spirit while attuned on steroids. Together, we can move through the worst horrors. For some, if not many, of our deeply traumatized clients, the experience of trauma may never be complete because of life circumstances. They won't allow it. Yet when we accompany these clients on part of life's journey, our deeply attuned, relationally engaged, playful spirit has the power to evoke experiences of light, even if just sparks and glimmers, to the darkness, calm and ease to dysregulation, flexibility and openness to rigidity and shutdown, integration and flow to splits and blocks, ease and unburdening, even if just for a moment, to pain and heaviness, spontaneity and curiosity to the forced and constrained, vitality, even if short-lived, to the deadness, joy and laughter, even if measured, to grief and loss, connection to melt disconnection and aloneness, possibility and hope to shift the impossible and intolerable, freedom of spirit and life energy. Thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you. And if you're all like me and this absolutely fascinates you, you will bookmark almost every single page of this book. Thank you so much for that. And uh, before we dive into audience Q&A, I'd like to bring a few of the questions that Dr. Blum and I discussed behind the scenes into this conversation, starting with you mentioned attunement on steroids. And I felt like that was one of the most impactful parts of your book for me. And in particular, the example of kvelling, which I related to as a Jewish reader, but maybe not everybody knows exactly what that is. So, what is attunement on steroids, and how is kvelling a great example of it?
Awesome. Attunement on steroids for me is truly the guiding principle of therapeutic presence and being with our traumatized clients. And I'll just quote this, that when we're attuned on steroids, it's everything we do as therapists and all that unfolds in the therapy relationship and the therapy environment can be used in the service of helping our clients to feel and be safe, seen, soothed, and secure so we can support them to be their best self. So, literally, when we attune on steroids, we take our clients in as fully as possible with their whole histories, and we authentically delight in them. Like, think for a moment when we see an infant in the crib or a puppy on his little puppy bed, right? We celebrate their strengths and achievements, but we also just delight in them because they're them, they're authentic being. And that delighting in is what I mean when I refer to kvelling. And it is a Yiddish word for those of you who haven't been raised like Katie and I. It means to literally burst with pride and excitement in and for someone. And what makes it so special, important to kvel about, and I'm saying it fully, kvel about our clients is that we get to share how they positively affect us and touch us. And they get to have a very different experience then of relationship, which helps them then grow to kvel about themselves.
Yeah, I love that. And ever since I read it, I've just been thinking about like cavelling in all different contexts. And yeah, in that therapy context, it's so powerful. I also wanted to ask you, we're sort of talking both about uh, therapy and storytelling and playfulness. Some examples of like that shared language include the ideas of dialectics and juxtaposition. And there were plenty more examples from your book. I mean, including just the idea of an ending too, if you want to touch on that, as they relate to both playfulness and the trauma narrative. Could you tell us more about how you see those terms sort of playing into both camps?
Absolutely. So to note that when somebody is traumatized, they think in dialectics. It's black, white, all or nothing, either or. And if we think about Maisha, right, she couldn't hold the both and. So, like, she would say, Dad couldn't have loved me because he hurt me. She couldn't hold the possibility that Dad loved me the best way he could and he hurt me. And so when we bring juxtaposition experiences or mismatch experiences, we actually help our clients have this aha experience where we're challenging their trauma related scripts and beliefs and opening up different possibilities and action patterns. So, this may not be the only narrative that guides my understanding. And for Maisha, what it became for her was wow, I guess my dad was an a-hole and he could be nice sometimes. And that was the beginning through these juxtaposition examples to shift the trauma narrative and that dialectic all or nothing.
Yeah, I think juxtaposition can be so powerful in writing I actually to be a little playful for a moment. A longtime friend who is a writer, her Instagram bio for a very long time was juxtaposition is my favorite position. And I think there's plenty of playfulness to be had with that concept. Um,
I love that.
yeah.
She doesn't charge royalties for it. I think I'm going to use it.
Yeah, borrow it, definitely. Definitely. I know we'll get to audience questions in just a second, but you have this description of boundaries in your book as being not only like too close, like stay away, but also too far, like come closer. And I feel like we so often talk about boundaries, just the ones that are like stay away. Could you tell us a little more about the push-pull between too close and too far? I felt like that was a very sort of unique part of your book, and I'd love if you could share it.
Sure. I'll use the example of 17-year-old Gwen that I spoke about in my book, who suffered with paralyzing separation anxiety well into her early adult years. She experienced both. She had a mom who, a trauma survivor herself, was constantly vigilant about Gwen, wondering if she was going to have mental illness like she did, and was always too close. While her father, who came from a background of a lot more emotional distance and disconnection, Gwen felt really separated from, and there was this cool little example, sort of like Mother May I game that I played with Gwen and her parents, where I asked her to literally and place them as close or far away from her till she felt comfortable. And what she did with the mom, she sent her to the other side of my office and had her not do eye to eye gaze, but be sort of perpendicular to her, while she brought her father within like 6 inches of her face, eye to eye gaze. And so boundaries are different with different people. And whether it's too enmeshed or too distant, we're constantly working to find the right balance and help it be healthier and attuned for both parties.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are going to enter the portion of tonight where audience members can ask questions via the chat. Um, I will just say again, I really recommend everybody read this book. It's just completely chock full of stories, really, and sort of like what we talk about when we talk about narrative medicine. So, um,
And I didn't pay Katie to say that, I swear.
no, I actually like chose to moderate this particular evening, and I'm so happy I did. And I'll hand it over to Allie for the audience Q&A portion.
Absolutely. So everyone, the chat is now reopened, and please bring forward your questions for Dr. Blum. All right, so we have one question that's just come in from Audrey. Hi, Dr. Blum. I'd like to know about your view on working with patients with trichotillomania across the lifespan, because I work on dermatology private practice. How do you think about using mirroring as a narrative and relational tool while also monitoring transference, countertransference, particularly with adult patients from Asian cultural backgrounds, where a more playful stance may deepen trust and expression for some, but may also risk being experienced as minimizing distress or disrupting expected therapeutic seriousness?
So I just want to make sure I'm hearing that it's with respect to clients who have trick or trichotillomania exclusively or in general. I just want a little more clarity because I can speak to the trichotillomania issue, but then just the issue of mirroring and doing it respectfully. So there, I just want to tease that apart for more clarity.
Yeah, Audrey, feel free to jump in the chat and share if you can clarify between those. Yes, so Audrey says here that yes, most of the patients are children and would not open up about their struggles.
Okay. So, in my experience, and I've only dealt with a handful of clients with trichotillomania, sometimes called trick. Um, it is a very shame-based behavior, and one would need to have deep trust and rapport to even bring a behavior like that into a mirroring experiential. I have had success in working with the symptom when a client is ready to talk about the trick in reframing the symptom as a protector, even though it brings up so much shame. And the mirroring, and again, I'm just going based on my experience. I don't know that it would be necessary because I think it might be too painful for these clients of all ages to have this visual seen and witnessed by them. But putting the behavior out here and exploring how it can be a helper in disguise would be the most important and helpful to take away the shame and the sense of silence about it. I hope that helps.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Blum. So our next question comes from Shantae. And Shantae says, you spoke about illumination rather than eradication. In your view, how does playful or embodied mirroring help someone shift their relationship to the story they're living inside without forcing insight before the nervous system is ready? As a follow-up, how do you help clients tolerate staying with what's being illuminated rather than fleeing it?
So I was saying elimination mentality, not illumination, but that is really interesting because illumination does happen as we start to update symptoms. And I'm going to ask Ellie if you could read the question one more time because I just wanted to clarify that point and then return to make sure I'm answering it just right.
Absolutely. So how does playful or embodied mirroring help someone shift their relationship to the story they're living without forcing insight before the nervous system is ready? Essentially, how do you help them say
Yeah,
the embodied experience?
right. What's so beautiful about embodied mirroring is you're not going anywhere before a client is ready because the client is the one leading you in the experience. They guide you, you follow them, and then it is a co-creation of the updated narrative. There's always a constant checking in process. Oh, I felt this. Are you feeling that? What are you noticing about that? So there is an ability to help the client step back about their own experience by watching the therapist embody what's going on with them. And the therapist gets to step back to watch what's going on with the client. And it's this beautiful flowing back and forth of distance and embodiment so that you are not overwhelming the nervous system. You are actually helping the nervous system to regulate, to allow the new coherent narrative to be developed and unfold.
Thank you. All right. Our next question is from Kelly. And Kelly asks, what do you think you brought to the session that gave participants the safety to look at their narrative differently?
Non-judgmental curiosity, a sense of deep respect that whatever was part of them, good, bad, neutral, I was welcoming and it was truly safe. I think that helped make a difference.
Right. And we had a follow-up question to one of our earlier questions as well. This one comes from Sarah Lucas. And Sarah says, I was wondering something similar following up to previous question. How do you balance use of playful approaches with adults from different cultural backgrounds that may perceive the strategy as infantilizing?
You really have to know the person you're working with. And you also have to know, and this was one of Katie's questions, which isn't just a cultural issue. You need to have a sense of whether play is safe for this person, because I've had a number of clients over the years where play was a medium of abuse. They were groomed through play to be perpetrated. So there is always this constant tuning in, checking out to see what's tolerable, asking clients, ooh, how did that feel for you when I just made that pun? Because I make a lot of puns. And clients are much more inclined to accept playfulness when it's self-effacing. But if it's about them, about their family, regardless of cultural background, we have to be really careful. It's kind of like my husband can make lots of fun of his family, right? But if I say something, how come you're saying that? So you really need to assess what is comfortable, safe, and check in. And what I have found over time when working long term with certain clients is because nobody wants to feel heaviness and pain and rigidity all the time. It's very constraining, and play offers openness, lightness, and joy. They eventually, over time, will gravitate a little bit towards it within their cultural background and also teach me how to make it attuned to their backgrounds and cultures.
Thank you. And we've got another question. Oh, this one is from Susan Kalev. And Susan says, my parents were also Holocaust survivors. Can you say something about epigenetic transmission of trauma?
They are now documenting it in all kinds of research. Gen 2s have, and Eric Felsen is a wonderful person to look up because she is one of the leading speakers and experts in this. The Gen 2s, and I'm a Gen 2, are so informed by living with this energy of whatever our parents shared. And some of the Gen 2s had parents who constantly shared their narratives and others who didn't. And I had one parent of each. It affects us even if the story isn't explicitly shared because it is in our genes. We know that if a mother was a survivor, her child, and then if that child is a female, it will be passed down in the eggs to the next child. So it affects 3 generations. And there are many other effects, which is a whole other discussion. And I'm just going to share my heart is with you too.
Thank you, Dr. Blum. So we have time for about maybe one more question before wrapping up. And my apologies to everyone. There's so many thoughtful questions in the chat. This one comes from Robert, and Robert says, can you please comment on how your approach works with children, perhaps between the ages of 4 and 10 years old, whose experience of the world is developing and changing at a rapid rate? For example, do you find that the trauma they've experienced shifts as they age as well, and you need to continue working with them or follow up?
There are many levels to that. And all I can say to Robert is there isn't a client of any age that I've ever worked with where a playful spirit isn't welcomed. People always would prefer to gravitate to joy and hope and optimism and creativity over the opposite. In today's world, there it may be extra guardedness because of the lack of safety and the constant changes on socio-political and so many other levels. But the receptivity I find is always there. My clients who practice similarly agree. And in a way, my belief is it's necessary to help fortify ourselves with trauma being something that can be transformed no matter what.
All right, I think that's all the time we have for questions. Katie?
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. These were great questions. And thank you to Dr. Blum, of course, for your insight and your stories tonight. And I also just in particular want to thank the Narrative Medicine program for the opportunity to be part of this community and to be in this space and have this conversation. So thank you, everybody. And yeah.
Katie, we are so happy to have you here tonight. And please remember to pick up a copy of Katie's book as well as Dr. Blum's. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're so glad you were here. A reminder that a recording of tonight's event will be shared later this week via email to all who registered, so keep an eye out for that. And we hope to see you all next month on May 6th for our final rounds of the season, when we'll be welcoming award-winning author Melissa Febos, who will be in conversation with Lily Dansinger about her recent memoir, The Dry Season. We'll see you then. Good night, everybody.
Good night.